Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang saranang gacchami, dhammang saranang gacchami, sanghang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami, tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami, tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami, tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami, tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. So nice to see everybody here today for Tuesday meditation. So it's interesting about went to visit Usha and Mal's temple on Saturday or Sunday, yeah. And was telling them a bit about the story of how I ended up coming to Toronto a few years ago. And so, most monks, when if you want to become a monk, actually told this story at Bhante Saranapala's class too, so it might be a repeat for anybody who heard on the internet. But most monks, when you want to become a monk in Canada or in North America, there's very few places where you can actually ordain as a monk. Now, there's a lot of temples and other places, but monks don't usually come there to stay and then go from being a lay person to a monk. It's kind of very few places. And then also to do that in English, there's not many places. There's maybe 5, 6, 7, something like that in North America, in the Theravada tradition, at least that I know of, at least that I can think of. And most of them are in what's called the forest tradition. In this forest tradition, you have to spend a year is what's called an anagarika. And during that year, you have to keep these 8 precepts. So you can't watch TV or anything like that anymore. You can only eat up till noon, usually twice a day, and then you can't sleep on high bed. There's 8 precepts altogether, but you can still handle money at that point. So you kind of go around the temple and or go around the monastery and drive the monks, and basically learn how to be a lay person. There's a lot of people coming from a Western cultural background have no idea about Buddhism. It's funny actually. A lot of the people who become monks, they might just have read something here and there, and then they just go to a monastery. From being a monk. Some of them had good jobs. Some of them have PhDs, and some were whatever it might be, and they just leave and go to these monasteries where you can train to be a monk. So you have to spend your first year doing that, usually driving monks around. That's one of the main things. Cooking. You have to spend a lot of time cooking, so you spend a lot of time in the kitchen. And basically you learn how to be a Buddhist layperson. If you're in Thailand or Sri Lanka, you can just go to the monastery and ordain in maybe pretty quick often, maybe a few months. But people who live in those countries have been Buddhists for their whole life. So you spend a lot of time learning how to be a Buddhist. And then your second year, you become what's called a samanera. So then you often give up the use of money and you become like a little monk. You can still store food for yourself, and you can still technically cook food. You don't need people to offer food to you, but you do that for another year. And if you still like it after that, you can request what's called the upasampada, or the going forth. And if the community is okay, you're okay, then you can ordain as a monk. And after you ordain as a monk, then you're expected to stay for 5 years under a teacher. So after you become a monk, then you get 227 precepts. You can't handle your own food a lot of the time. You basically start to, people have to offer you food. There's a lot to it. And so during that period of 5 years, you stay under a teacher and with a community so that you can learn this lifestyle and have it ingrained in you. And it's a little bit like being re-raised. You can imagine these people, some of them, they come from powerful positions. They were in some good job or whatever, and they get inspired by the Buddha's teachings, and they leave their job, and then it's like they become kids again. You have to, people will tell you, go here, do this, you kind of, and there's a hierarchy in monasteries, which is based on seniority. So the most senior people always sit at the front, they always get their food first, and senior monks are to refer to junior monks as either friend or by their name, and junior monks refer to senior monks as Venerable Sir. So it's a real different lifestyle going from that. And then you stay under a teacher. All this is good, very good for your knowledge of Buddhism. Then you stay under a teacher for 5 years. And when you're under that teacher, you have to ask permission every time you want to leave the premises of the monastery. You can't leave the premises by the monastic rules without asking their permission. Can I go here? Can I go there? If you ever want to really leave, go on a trip somewhere, you have to really ask. And usually you don't get to. They send you somewhere during your second or third year for a year to stay under another teacher, and then you come back and finish what's called your dependence or nisaya. So by the time all that is over, it's 7 years. So it's kind of close to a decade that you've now spent in a monastery. So you can imagine, once your 5th year comes up, you can go wherever you want to go. And you can imagine the monks, when it's getting to their 4th year, they're kind of all right, here we go. Where am I going to go wandering off to? Because originally the monastic tradition, the Buddhist monastic tradition, is a tradition of wanderers. It's a tradition of what they call samanas. And samanas are not traditionally people who are settled in a particular place forever. They're always on the wander. So you can see, if you ever read the Buddhist suttas, sometimes he's in Vesali, sometimes he's in Rajagaha. And these are places, sometimes he goes he's wandering a decent distance sometimes, around northern India. He goes different places, and all these suttas, he's in a different place. And actually, even he died while wandering. He ate this bad food or some type of food that didn't, it seems that may have died of food poisoning. We're not 100% sure. But in any event, he died on the road wandering. After he ate that food, he set out and kept wandering, and then ended up passing away near a small town in between 2 sal trees. And so when you become a monk, you're always waiting for this opportunity. Okay, where am I going to go? Well, not always, but they always caution you, don't get restless, don't think about where you're going to go. But of course, monks are always thinking, where am I going to go? Where's going to be the adventure after my 5 years are up? And so, for me, I'd always had this kind of feeling that it'd be nice to go to Sri Lanka, or not always, but for a long time. I'd like to visit Sri Lanka, and had intended to come back to Canada for 3 months, or 6 months, to spend what's called the rainy season retreat here, and then to spend some time at a monastery to kind of get acclimatized, and maybe go out on my kind of adventure, following that. But as things happened, kind of ended up coming down with these stomach problems, and so ended up having to stay here for longer than I thought. So the 3 months went by and still had stomach problems, and then 6 months went by and still had stomach problems. So I was like, well, I can't go, I've got to stay here. And one of the amazing things about all this was that, I came from what was called a Thai tradition. Buddhism has gone to all these various countries in the world. And all these countries, if they have slight differences between them, if they're all Theravada countries, they're not immense differences. And so I didn't really know many people or many monks in the GTA. I just knew some of the monks from Mahamevanawa Monastery, but that was it, because they'd come to the monastery where I ordained before. But one of the interesting things was that right on coming into these monasteries here, it was kind of this immediate warm welcome, from everybody. It was you got these monasteries, and they're all a part of a family, even though they've been separated for, some of them you've never met. They're in different countries. They don't know who you are, but you just kind of show up, and it's welcome, stay as long as you want, kind of, our doors are open to you. So I used to, when I first started coming to the Mahavihara, I always used to call Bhante Ratanasiri first, and I'd be like, can I come and stay overnight tonight? He'd be like, yeah, sure, come. And then eventually, after I did it, a certain number of times, he's like, you don't have to ask. I consider you to be like a resident monk, so you can come stay whenever you want. You're just going to show up. And then this was something that noticed here too, that people just kind of show up at the temples, whenever. And there just always seems to be this stream of people kind of coming through the temples, just coming on through. And the monks are there for these people in various capacities, and the people are there for the monks. So this was something that was a real blessing for me to witness, because I'd always been kind of, before becoming a Buddhist, I was kind of like an atheist and didn't really believe in any religion. And then after becoming a Buddhist, I mainly went to meditation centers. Meditation is obviously, meditation is wonderful, but I didn't grow up a Buddhist, so I didn't see the way that it functioned in people's lives, didn't see how it actually worked in people's lives to make them happy, to make them feel at ease. And so this was something that ended up getting the chance to observe here in Toronto. Over these past 3.5 years, was just the way that people interacted with one another, especially the kindness of the monks and the amazing unity of the Buddhist Sangha, despite the fact being separated for, not separated, but 2,500 years later, you show up, at a temple, almost any temple, and it's like, welcome, come on in, you're welcome to stay here. But of course, one of the things with the traditional Buddhist monastic setup is that monks pretty much everywhere are still kind of mendicant. In other words, or most places, usually you'll have like an abbot. Once you become an abbot, then you get tied to a monastery. You kind of, if you accept that position, then you don't wander, because you have to be there to take responsibility for the monastery. But quite often, monks who aren't abbots or don't have like a particular tie, they always can be seen to be somewhere or the other. Actually, even the abbot at the monastery where I ordained, he would spend quite a lot of time, like maybe a few months a year, at the other branch monasteries in the tradition, and then the monks would be around too. So what this means is, as a monk, one of the interesting things is that you always have this kind of experience of being at a place, but not 100% being there. Kind of like a homeless person, they've got like, a place where they go, but not like 100% all the time. Kind of, you know that, things could change. Anything could change at any time. There was this kind of famous quote with Ajahn Chah, and he had this, his most senior disciple was named Ajahn Sumedho, or senior Western disciple was named Ajahn Sumedho. And when he first went to stay at Ajahn Chah's monastery, he would always be looking to Ajahn. He was very enamored with Ajahn Chah. He was very kind of charismatic. And then he started to notice like some flaws that Ajahn Chah had. And then he started to criticize him, like Ajahn Chah. And so being a kind of Westerner, like Westerners will like go right up to the person and criticize them right to their face. And so he did. Which, by the way, if you were in Asia, you would never like dare to do that. It was going to be like the most audacious thing you could think of. But in any event, Longpo Sumedho went up to Ajahn Chah and he started criticizing him for things that he noticed were wrong about him. And what Ajahn Chah said to him was, Sumedho, it's a good thing that I'm not perfect, because if I were perfect, you wouldn't be looking, I can't remember what the exact word he was, but you basically wouldn't be looking for a refuge inside of yourself. You'd be looking for a refuge in me. That's where you'd be looking for your refuge. And so this is one of the things as a wandering monk, or as a monk, is that because of the way the Buddha set up his teachings, because of the way he set up the monastic Sangha, it's difficult to be looking for 100% permanent refuge as a monk. Things are always changing around. Not like at a breakneck pace, like new app. Like these. I was talking with Mal the other day. Like they come up with like these new updates for apps like every 30 days. It's not necessarily like that, But it's always this case where we're following the way that the Buddha did. People are there, but they're not there. It's kind of never 100% gone, but never 100% there. So the Buddha would kind of wander, wander to Vesali, wander to Rajagaha, wander to Savatthi, and then he'd be gone. And then he'd wander back to Rajagaha, wander back to Vesali, wander back to Savatthi, and then he'd be there. And because the Buddha wandered in this way, because the monks wandered in this way, they could never 100%, well, the Buddha was well gone, but it was never 100% that they had a home. That's why the Buddhist teachings, these samanas, are called homeless people. And what this forces monks to do is it forces them to try more to look for a refuge inside themselves. Because this is where the Buddhist teachings point. This is where they lead to. Whatever it is in samsara, whatever it is in the phenomenal world, where a person looks for their refuge, it can change. And because it changes, so long as one grabs onto it, then one suffers when it changes. But there's always this opportunity, which is that the purpose of the Buddhist teachings is to build up these good qualities inside of oneself. And so long as one has these good qualities, then those good qualities don't escape. They don't go away. So remember when I was young, I think I told this story to a bunch of people before, but was kind of by this roadside. And we being a young man, I wasn't always like the wisest young man. And we do this kind of like game where you'd inhale and exhale really quickly and then stand up. And then that would cause you to like pass out. Don't ask me why. We thought this was a fun thing to do when I was a teenager, but somehow we did. And I remember being by this roadside, we were doing this game, and then the person would stand behind you and catch you, like make sure you didn't fall. So I did this kind of breathing in and out, and then I stood up and I felt normal. And I was like, okay, I'm fine, And then I said, okay, it's okay, don't worry about it. And then after the fellow stepped away, I started kind of like, leaning back and forth and careening. So I leaned like one way, then I leaned towards the other way, and I was leaning towards this way, I started to stumble. And as I was stumbling, I started to stumble into the road. And as I was going to the road, I still remember very clearly seeing this set of headlights, like this kind of like, you hear the cars go by, like, and I was like, well, this is it. I've got a few more seconds to live. Don't have a super long time to live. And still remember at that time, as far as I can recall, that you think about things that were important to you in your life. You think about whatever awards you really tried hard to get, maybe other various things. It was almost like one of those cliched things where you've got time to, go back and think. But remember these things, it felt like kind of sinking into a marsh. And, they were like, you ever see these plants in the marsh? And just growing up out of the, whatever the soil in the marsh. If you try to grab onto them, they just go down. I mean, they're there, but you grab onto them and they're just going down. They're not going to hold you up. But then remember thinking about the, various like minor things that I thought were minor at the time, like good things, maybe, can't remember the exact things, but maybe I'd done something good for my mother as far as I recall. And that seemed like a really solid log. It's like you're, sinking under something and that log is there, to support you. And these kind of things, this kind of log, this kind of sinking, this raft is the Dhamma that one builds up within oneself. Because this is a possession that doesn't get taken away from a person very easily, even when other things external to one fall away. And that's the point of a person's meditation practice. This is, one of the points, this is one of our goals. And so I remember as well, there was one time I was at this Zen temple. That's where before I went to the monastery in Perth, I used to live at a Zen temple in Toronto. And, I didn't know any arahants personally. And I was thinking to myself, like, why aren't there any arahants anymore? Where are they? How come there's no arahants that I can find, around? And then not too long after that, actually, these kind of free distribution books arrived at the Zen temple. And one of these distribution books was called Patipada. It was kind of about the practice of monks in what they called the Thai forest tradition. And these monks had undertaken this traditional lifestyle of wandering and keeping the monastic rules and focusing most of their time, all of their time, on meditation. And reading about these things, then I felt like, whoa, here it is. There's monks who are living this lifestyle and they're getting the results that they wanted. Here's monks who are becoming stream enterers. Here's monks who are becoming once returners. Here's monks who are becoming non-returners. Here's monks who are becoming arahants. And this is the way that they do it. This is how the practice is done. So it was my good fortune that this monastery in Perth was opening up not too long after that, and so got the chance to go there and stay there. But that kind of knowledge, that comes, not knowledge, but, or it can make an impression that there are people in the world who practice this way and get these results. There are still people who are stream enterers. There are still people who are once returners. There are still people who are non-returners. There are still people who are arahants alive in the world. And the practice that leads them that way is still alive. It's still something that people can realize for themselves. And so this actually is the ultimate aim of anybody's meditation practice. This is the ultimate aim of any Dhamma practice, because whatever it is that people are searching for, whatever it is that people want, all boils down to one thing. It's that people want happiness. They don't want suffering. Whatever a person does in their career, in their family, wherever it may be, is all in pursuit of happiness, is all for the search for happiness, is all to have happiness. This is the ultimate purpose of a person's life. So whenever a person wants to look for happiness, to whatever degree they desire it, it's to be found in a lasting way in these noble attainments. It's to be found in a more lasting way in once return. It's to be found in a more lasting way in non-return. And it's to be found in a way that doesn't change at all in arahantship, in the end of the Buddhist path, because this is the end of suffering. So remember still, thinking about that and being inspired by that. And that's actually the purpose for which people become monks. It's the purpose for which people shave their head in Thailand, for which they shave their eyebrows as well as their head. It's the purpose for which these people that I met in the monasteries give up their high-paying jobs and live for 5-6 years under a teacher. It's the purpose for which they give up eating afternoon, give up the use of money, give up sleeping on high beds, give up the potential for them to have families. They give all these things up because they want happiness. And happiness truly is to be found in the mind. So the nice thing about learning about this tradition is it wasn't just monks who achieved these levels. It wasn't just monks who achieved stream entry. It wasn't just monks who achieved once return. There were also lay people in the modern day who achieved these things. Lay people for whom these things became a reality. And this is the highest goal that a person can have for their meditation practice. Because everything that a person's life is aimed towards is aimed at happiness, but it's truly to be found here. It's truly to be found by looking at one's own deeds, looking at one's own practice, looking at one's own virtues, and building those up in the mind. Building them up till they become a place where one feels safe. Even when everything else is changing, even when everything else is sinking, still one has these things. These things don't leave. And if one actually attains one of the noble attainments, and that's something for a person that doesn't change at all. That's something where they have a true refuge, and they also become a refuge for other people. So actually those are the people we bow to in this kind of Itipiso chant. So actually this was always the kind of, maybe not ulterior motive, maybe ulterior motive isn't the right word, but this is always the motivation behind teaching for monks, for lay people, or ultimately for people who want to teach meditation. That's the motivation, is may people understand that. May people generate the desire to have these noble attainments. May people realize them in their mind. may they get the maximum benefit from the Buddha's teachings. Because, as we've been saying, all of it's for the sake of happiness. And happiness is to be found here. So remember, there was this sutta where Venerable Sariputta passed away. And Ananda came to the Buddha and he said, actually, I think he was attending the Buddha, and somebody announced to the Buddha that Venerable Sariputta had passed away, who was the Buddha's right-hand disciple. And Venerable Ananda said, you know, it feels like my whole world is disoriented. You know, everything's been turned upside down, and it's because Venerable Sariputta passed away. And the Buddha, why is that? He said, when Venerable Sariputta died, did he take your share of virtue? Did he take your share of concentration? Did he take your share of wisdom? I say, no, Lord. So in other words, another person's death doesn't take that away. If a person loses their job, it doesn't take that away. If a person loses their health, it doesn't take that away. So this is the most valuable treasure that a person can have. It's this treasure of the Dhamma. This treasure of the Dhamma that each of us has gained in coming to meditate. For however long we've spent meditating, for however long we've spent on wholesome qualities, that treasure belongs to us. Nothing takes it away unless we lose it ourselves. That's something, that's our personal possession, that we can admire, that we can keep, that we can cultivate so that it grows. And in growing, when it grows, when it bears fruit, it bears the fruit of happiness. It bears the fruit of safety. It bears the fruit of a refuge that we can rely upon even up to the end of our life and beyond.